He's a billionaire. He's an avid reader, a collector of data, facts. He seems to absorb and accumulate knowledge. Just habit, just the way he is. Reads all the time. He's a little bit introverted, very clever. Little remote. Married to this beautiful younger woman. And he senses his marriage is not going quite too well. She's having an affair, he suspects, with this photographer. I drive him absolutely mad because I seem to come up with the answers all the time. As Alec Baldwin put him to me one day, he said that Green always suspected that Morse had nothing, that he was just, a jerk, a stiff, who didn't really know enough about life, wasn't worldly enough. And then in the end he realizes that Morse has everything. Not only money, but he has everything inside himself as a spiritual reserve, mental reserves. And these men have their backs to the wall. They're faced with imminent death, and they can smell it everywhere. They sense it all around them. And you either go under and die and don't survive. This line that Green says, do you want to die, Bob? And Bob is beginning to panic. Do you want to die? Go on, stay out. You die if you want to. But I'm not going to die. We can overcome, we can conquer. What they face is, in death is starvation, hypothermia, death all the way, because they're lost right in the heart of the wilderness, and you've got to know how to survive. It's a rites of passage story, really, character-driven. I'm sure David Mamet wouldn't like that description of it, but I think that's the only way I can put it. They're very powerful characters. And Morse becomes even more deep, or wiser, and probably a broadened compassion. He's owned by Doug Seuss, and I've worked with Bart before, and I'm with Brad Pitt in Legends of the Fall. And Doug Seuss, I cannot say enough about him. He's a most remarkable man, and the way he deals with this great grizzly, who's I think he's about 1,500 pounds, massive bear. And Doug treats him with such love and respect. And of course, this animal is a killer. If you get near him, he'll take your head off. The pain was useful because it strengthened me. I was fighting the bear, but using the pain in my back to fight this. And so I could stand and deliver, and it toughened my shoulders and my arms.
Bob is someone who's funny, and he's lively, and he cracks jokes, and he's wicked. Charles is suspicious that Bob is up to something beyond adultery, and he voices that, and with no real evidence. Mamet tells a story in which everything is to extremes. Charles is not just an intellectual, he's a super intellectual. Charles is not just a gifted man who's successful, he's a billionaire. Mamet has ratcheted up all of the elements of the story. These guys don't get stuck in traffic on the San Diego freeway. They get in a plane crash in the middle of the Canadian Rockies. We go as far as we possibly can to ratchet up the drama as high as you can. I'm not an authority on Mamet, but sometimes I think that he writes the things that he writes where people use words almost like fists sometimes. Very short and very tight. Again, there really is a kind of, I guess, a kind of a Mamet a key that you have to play the song in. And if you don't, I don't think you're going to get all the juice out of the rind that you might.
She's worldly, sophisticated. She has an excitement for life. She's very compassionate. She loves her husband very much. The environment, the location is wonderful. It's so works so well with this film because it's kind of the greatness of nature and how small humans can be in it.
Stephen is he's a photo assistant. He's Alec's photo assistant, young, pretty hungry, out there and just trying to do the best job he can. And he sort of gets, then he gets stuck in a really unfamiliar environment. And I think it freaks him out. That's what happens. Just freaks him out, I think he's the kind of guy that can handle anything usually, but just lost in the woods. We're sort of walking in this unknown terrain like every day, and like, how do we help each other? And that's what these guys have to do. They have to depend on each other and have to, and even when, other motives come up, there's still that underlying core of, yeah, but, I gotta help you somehow.
So I always argued that we really needed to take this film somewhere that people haven't really been before, so it needed to look very, very rugged. If you were going to believe that three men were stranded in a wilderness or a God-forsaken wilderness so far from anywhere that no one else has ever been there, then you really want to take the audience there. You can't really fake that. You've got to take the actors and everybody into this environment, because that becomes the glue that holds this type of film together. So what I wanted to do was to put probably the most scary and vicious bear attack ever filmed on film. Because for two reasons. This was not just some desire to create some new monster movie. It was really if three men are trapped in the wilderness with 7 matches and 1 knife, and they're 1,000 miles from home, and a bear starts to trail them and is going to pick them off one by one, I wanted to instill in the audience the same terror that's going to be instilled in these 3 characters. And in order to do that, you have to be extremely credible with everything that happens with the bear. Our collective consciousness about bears is that they are cuddly, cute, lovable creatures that we take to bed with us when we're 2 and 3 years old. And no matter how many times you see a giant grizzly, it's always in the zoo, it's always trained, you don't see them in the wild, you don't see what they're capable of doing. And therefore, we have this collective consciousness of them as being very safe creatures. We might hear about bear attacks, but you don't. They have a very beautiful face. Everything about them is non-threatening. But the more I read about bear attacks, the more savage these are as really kind of primitive, primal creatures. And it was interesting when you take actors, the likes of Tony, who's never really been exposed to this type of action, adventure, and harrowing location type of movie. Alec is different. Alec's done this sort of thing before, but when you take actors of that caliber into this environment, it's tougher, but it also braces them up more too. You know, it gives them more to work off. You know, they're actually there. 3 movies in a row had taken a lot of stress on him, and he had a kind of a slipped disc or a herniated disc in his vertebra, and it was causing him extreme pain. What he did was actually use it to his advantage. Sometimes he would just get so frustrated at his inability to perform physically, properly, that he would take that rage out on the bear, or he would take it out in some other way. He would focus it and channel it and spit it out, and sometimes it would be truly frightening. There's an unspoken thing between these 2 men, because they've achieved, or they've done things that no other man will ever do, which is being tested in a very, very primal environment. You know, how far will you go as a man, as a human being, to save your own life and those of those around you? Will you give up, or will you go the distance?
What I like about all of David's work is that it's extremely primal. It's one guy pitted against another guy, 2 guys pitted against the wilderness. You know, will they bond? Won't they bond? Will they survive? Which one will survive? Which one will die? I mean, it's very primal stuff. It's a movie about survival. It's a movie about 2 men bonding over starting off with a major problem, one trying to kill another, and then trying to figure out a way to bond, even with their differences. At the same time, they're in the middle of the wilderness with a bear and having to survive with nothing but you know, 7 matches and a knife. And you know, it's an odyssey that only nature can you know, pull you into.
When one sits down to write, and if one's writing well, it is an adventure. You know, because you're making up a story, and you're participating in a story, and you get to mold it, and to get to redo it, just like the stories that we tell ourselves when we're walking down the street. You know, wouldn't it be great if? So writing is no different. It's just writing down those fantasies. So if you're doing it well, it's just as enjoyable as those fantasies of love, success, revenge, courage that we have when we're walking down the street. It's very easy to, as often happens when people get lost in the woods, they start mistrusting their compass because they literally panicked. And the term panic is an old ancient term, and it means invested with the god Pan, who is the god of the woods. And it means when you get panicked, you venture into Pan's domain, and the god strikes you back by driving you a little bit insane. And when it happens to you in the woods, it's the real thing. It's no joke. And there are certain circumstances in which one either has to confront it and overcome it or die. And So that's what this movie is about.